Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Shakespearean Student. I've decided that this December I'm going to talk about one of the most lavish, the most intriguing, and one of the least historically accurate of Shakespeare's history plays. In fact, his final history play and his final play he ever wrote, as far as we know, before he retired in 1613, Henry VIII. But I'm actually not going to talk about the titular king. I'll save that for another time. I'm actually going to talk about the villain, the man who, for the first half of the play, dominates every decision that the king makes, and that is ultimately responsible for his, well, according to Shakespeare's propagandistic version of history, is the man who is responsible for Henry's divorce from his faithful wife, his mismanagement of the country, his dishonorable truce with France, and everything evil that ever happened in the reign of King Henry VIII. His right-hand man, Cardinal Woolsey. I happen to know a lot about this character since I played him back in 2008. It was actually my first play that I did in graduate school, and we got to do a touring production, and I got to perform on the stage of the Blackfriars, the reconstruction of Shakespeare's indoor theater in Stanton, Virginia. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to talk a little bit about the historical Woolsey, then talk about his journey through the play with a few relevant quotes, talk about the experience of performing Woolsey, and then do a little bit of a historical verdict. Was this version of Woolsey accurate? Was it fair to his to the man as he lived? And how does this play stack up in terms of his history plays? By Shakespeare standards, Woolsey was probably considered an arrogant social climber, a lowly son of a butcher from Essex who raised to unfathomable heights through his pure Machiavellian cunning, and therefore he was drained of any true nobility. But looked at from another perspective, Woolsey's the ultimate success story. He grew up the son of a butcher in Ipswich around the year 1475. He then went to Oxford University, became a priest, became a chaplain, then became an advisor to King Henry VII, where he became his chaplain. And then eventually he became Lord High Chancellor to King Henry VIII. What that meant was he was in charge of England's finances. This was before the role of Prime Minister actually existed, but Woolsey, I'd say, pretty much set the template for the role of Prime Minister, because he controlled the access to the royal seal. So if the king wanted to pass a law or wanted to raise a tax or do anything that required parliamentary consent, he would write it down in a letter and seal it with the royal seal. And Woolsey was the one who controlled access to the seal. It had binding legal authority. Later on in the play, the nobles attempt to get the seal away from Woolsey, and he staunchly defends his right to have it. So I'd say that even though in Shakespeare's day Woolsey might have been considered too ambitious, too powerful, and too cunning by the standards of the aristocracy at the time, you could look at it another way. He was just really, really good at his job, and he was able to control the levers of power and bring England into a new era of prosperity. Yet, in Shakespeare's day and in the historical 1530s, Wolsey was eventually hated. He fell from grace. He managed to alienate Henry's entire court, though that's not entirely undeserved. See, what happened was after Wolsey successfully secured a divorce from Catherine of Aragon at the king's behest, it was discovered that he was, in fact, embezzling funds from the crown. He also was attempting to bribe the cardinals in Rome to make himself the next pope. Wolsey lived by a principle that we would now basically call the prosperity gospel, where because he was the finance minister, he was not shy about showing off how much wealth he had accumulated. He wore his wealth on his sleeve. The most obvious example of this was the fact that he was actually the original owner of the Grand Palace, Hampton Court, in London, which later the king actually persuaded Wolsey to give to himself. But this was a symbol of his wealth, his success as a financier, and also a sign of God's favor as he saw it. So, looked at another way, even though Wolsey was guilty of embezzlement and he was attempting to gain the Pope's favor, the favor of the cardinals in Rome to make him the next pope, I suspect that in Wolsey's mind, he only thought that making himself pope would further England's alliance with the See of Rome, and thus make the crown even more legitimate. Remember that for hundreds of years, kings needed to obtain the blessing of the Pope to obtain their legitimacy. This goes back all the way to Charlemagne. So I think that Wolsey might have been acting selfishly, but he might have also been acting, in his mind, in the interest of his country. This sort of contradiction, this sort of inability to tell whether he was a good man who did bad things or a bad man who did good things is one reason why Wolsey is such a fascinating person from a historical perspective.